We are in agony.
Yeah.
We are in agony. It is unbearable.
More than 60 days in, no arrest, no suspect named, and a piece of physical evidence that could break this case wide open, sitting in a lab waiting for a match. That's where the Nancy Guthrie investigation stands right now. There's something that gets overlooked in how this case was handled from the very beginning. When family members arrived at Nancy's home on the morning of February 1st, the back doors of the house were propped open, not broken, not forced, propped open. And yet, in the early hours of the investigation, there was a moment, brief but documented, where the working assumption inside the sheriff's department was that Nancy may have simply wandered away from home on her own. An 84-year-old woman, no shoes, no phone, no purse, back doors open in the middle of the night, and the initial instinct was that she walked away. A law enforcement insider later described that as an immediate rush to judgment, and according to former prosecutor Lindsay Richards, that rush had consequences. Due to mistakes made from the very beginning, Richards told Newsweek, the investigation has not led to anything fruitful or helpful.
Do you think there's areas that the investigators, law enforcement haven't searched? And if so, what do they do right now?
Of course there's places they haven't searched. I don't believe she's in Tucson. I think she might just be outside. When you're talking about folks like the Cajun Navy and Texas EcuSearch, why in the world would you turn these people away that know how to search in all terrain? They've got horses, they've got ATVs, they've got equipment and people and experts. We should be utilizing them. There's no doubt about that.
The more time that passes, she said, the harder it gets. That framing matters, because what happened next made things even harder. The crime scene at Nancy's home was processed, cleared by investigators, and then, days later, retaped. Investigators went back. They collected additional evidence they had not taken the first time. In the window between those two visits, journalists had walked directly up to Nancy Guthrie's front door. No barriers, no security. Public access to an active abduction scene. Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed it at a press conference on February 5th. He said his team got what they thought was complete. He said if he had the chance to do it again, he would have held the scene longer. That's an admission that carries weight in a case where physical evidence is this scarce. You don't get a second chance at a crime scene. What was missed in that window, what was walked over, what was compromised, is something investigators may never fully account for. But here's where it gets more complicated. The evidence that was recovered points directly at a specific individual, and that individual went to significant effort to make sure they wouldn't be identified. On February 10th, the FBI released surveillance footage from cameras at Nancy's home. The footage showed a masked figure at her front door on the morning of February 1st, during the window when Nancy disappeared. FBI Director Kash Patel later confirmed what the footage shows. The individual appeared to be armed and appeared to be actively tampering with the recording device at the front of the house. Think about what that means. This person showed up wearing a mask, they were carrying something, and the first thing they did at the door was attempt to disable the camera. That is not someone who acted on impulse. That is someone who planned this, thought about it, and took steps to prevent being seen. The camera wasn't destroyed, it still captured footage. But the attempt to interfere with it tells investigators that whoever this was, they were aware of the camera's existence before they arrived. And that alone raises a serious question about whether this person had prior knowledge of the property. Beyond the footage, investigators have something more tangible. A pair of black gloves was recovered near the property. Investigators noted that the gloves appear to match the gloves visible on the suspect in the surveillance footage. DNA was extracted from those gloves and submitted to CAUDIS, the FBI's national DNA database, which holds profiles from more than 19 million offenders and arrestees across the country. If the person who left that DNA has ever been arrested, convicted, or processed through the federal system, that profile exists in the database. A match would give investigators a name without a single additional witness coming forward. So far, no public match has been announced. At the same time, on DNA collected directly from inside Nancy's home, Biological material that did not belong to Nancy or to anyone in regular close contact with her has been sent to multiple labs simultaneously. Investigators have raised the possibility of genetic genealogy as a tool if standard database matching doesn't produce results. Genetic genealogy is the same forensic method that identified Brian Koberger as the suspect in the Idaho student murders after years without a breakthrough. It works by building a family tree from partial DNA, tracing relatives of the contributor and working backward to an identity. The DNA exists. The method exists. The question is whether the profile is strong enough and whether the contributor has identifiable relatives in the genealogy databases used for that process. This is the forensic thread the entire case may ultimately depend on. If you want to follow every development in this case as it happens, every forensic update, every new lead, subscribe now. This channel covers active investigations from start to finish. Don't miss the update that breaks it. Now let's talk about the ransom notes, because this is the part of the investigation that law enforcement has been the least transparent about, and it raises more questions than it answers. Starting on February 2nd, multiple media outlets in Tucson received what appeared to be ransom communications. KOLD-TV, the local CBS affiliate, was among the first to receive one. The notes demanded payment in cryptocurrency. There were deadlines built into at least two of them. Those deadlines passed by February 9th. Nothing happened. Law enforcement has not confirmed the notes are authentic. They haven't denied it either. Officially, the position is, we are investigating to determine whether these came from someone actually holding Nancy. But Savannah Guthrie said something publicly that law enforcement has not contradicted. She said she tends to believe that two of the notes, specifically the one sent to the local television station, are real. That's not a throwaway comment. That's a family member, presumably in communication with investigators, telling the public she believes two of these communications are genuine. If the family has been told something in private that leads them to that conclusion, it suggests investigators have reason to take at least some of these notes seriously, even as they remain officially silent on the matter. And if the notes are real, that shifts the entire motive structure of this case. It means Nancy wasn't taken at random. It means someone targeted her specifically because of who her daughter is.
I don't know
Yeah.
that it's because she's my mom and somebody thought, oh, that girl, that lady has money, we can make a quick buck. I mean, that would make sense, but we don't know. But yeah, that's probably, which is too much to bear. To think that I brought this to her bedside.
It means this was researched, planned, and executed with a financial goal in mind. A ransom scheme targeting an elderly woman carried out by a masked armed individual who knew the property layout and tried to disable the cameras. That's not an opportunistic crime. That's an organized one, which makes the lack of any named suspect, more than 2 months later, even harder to explain. There's one piece of evidence in this investigation that has no parallel in almost any other missing persons case. Nancy Guthrie had a pacemaker, and at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, that pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. Law enforcement knows this. It gives them a precise endpoint, the last confirmed moment of device connectivity. But the device itself holds more than just a timestamp. Pacemakers log cardiac telemetry. That data could tell investigators whether Nancy's heart was beating normally at 2:28, whether it was showing signs of physiological distress, or whether it had stopped altogether. Cybersecurity expert Morgan Wright put it plainly, the pacemaker is the best unbiased witness in this case right now. To try to locate Nancy using that device, law enforcement deployed helicopters with Bluetooth scanners attached to the undercarriage, designed specifically to detect an active pacemaker signal from the air. They flew search patterns over the Catalina foothills. No signal was detected. That could mean Nancy is no longer in the immediate search area. It could mean the device has lost power. It could mean something else entirely. What investigators have not said publicly is whether the absence of a signal narrows or expands their theory of where she is. This is the part investigators haven't fully explained. The search effort itself has faced serious criticism, not just for the crime scene issues, but for what wasn't done in the terrain surrounding Nancy's home. The Catalina foothills are not easy ground. Investigator Cheryl McCollum visited the area personally and described what search teams are dealing with: plants that cut, cement-hard soil, extreme heat, rattlesnakes, mountain lions. On the day she visited, the temperature was 105 degrees Fahrenheit. She noted that in those conditions, search dogs can only work for limited periods, and in that desert environment, evidence degrades faster than almost anywhere else in the country. Here's the thing. Volunteer organizations, specifically groups like the Cajun Navy and Texas EquiSearch, have ATVs, horses, and personnel trained for exactly this type of terrain search. They have covered ground in conditions that law enforcement teams can't sustain. McCollum has said publicly, why are they not being used? As of this recording, no confirmed large-scale volunteer deployment of that kind has been reported, and the family has also flagged something that hasn't been explained. In a public statement, the Guthries asked anyone with information to think back not just to January 31st and the early hours of February 1st, but also to the late evening of January 11th. January 11th, 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Law enforcement hasn't explained what significance that date holds. The family mentioned it for a reason. What happened on January 11th and how it connects to what happened 3 weeks later is something investigators apparently know about, but haven't shared publicly. That alone is worth paying attention to. Now, separate from the investigation itself, there's a crisis of leadership around it, and it matters because confidence in the people running this case directly affects how it gets worked. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos is facing a recall effort, a unanimous no-confidence vote from his own deputies, and serious questions about his employment history. All 306 members of the Pima County Deputies Union voted that they do not have confidence in him, not a majority, every single one. Records from El Paso, where Nanos worked earlier in his career, show he was suspended 8 times in roughly 5 years. The suspensions involved use of force incidents, at least one serious complaint involving a hospitalized individual, and other conduct violations. In a deposition taken in December 2025, Nanos was asked directly whether he had ever been suspended during his career in law enforcement. He testified that he had not. When the El Paso records surfaced publicly, Pima County supervisors called for his resignation. Supervisor Matt Mattis said plainly, "This is someone who, had the department known about that history, would not have been hired." A recall campaign was launched. The Board of Supervisors convened to formally review his employment history. A report cited by the Tucson Sentinel also alleged Nanos had used department resources for political purposes. Nanos has defended himself on all fronts. He says he interpreted the deposition question as referring only to his time at Pima County. He says he stands by his decisions in the Guthrie case. He called his El Paso years a very colorful career. But here's the problem. This is happening in real time while the investigation is active. The sheriff leading the most high-profile missing persons case in the country right now is simultaneously managing a recall effort, a no-confidence vote, public accusations of misconduct, and questions about whether he lied under oath. That is an enormous distraction at exactly the wrong moment. In late March, the Guthrie family offered $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The FBI's separate reward of $100,000 is also still active. Savannah Guthrie, who stepped away from NBC, including coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics, gave her first public interview in weeks and said something that cuts through all the investigative language and legal framing. She said someone knows something. Maybe someone noticed a car in the neighborhood that didn't belong. Maybe someone whose behavior changed after January 31st. Maybe a contractor, a worker, a neighbor who saw something small and didn't realize what it meant. Even if that something is someone's been acting strange for the last 8 weeks, she said. Someone knows. On April 6th, 2026, as Savannah returned to the Today Show for the first time since her mother vanished, she said she wants to smile again. She said when she does, it will be real. Her mother has still not been found. Here's where the case sits right now. DNA from the gloves is in the federal database. DNA from inside the home is being processed at multiple labs. New surveillance images have been recovered from cameras at the property, previously inaccessible footage that the FBI is still analyzing. A masked armed suspect has been captured on camera but not identified. Ransom notes that maybe genuine have been received but not publicly verified. A 20-person task force is working the case full-time, and a date, January 11th, sits unexplained in a family statement, waiting for someone to connect it to something. The investigation is active. It is not a cold case. But 60-plus days without an arrest, without a named suspect, and without knowing where Nancy is, that is a long time. And every week that passes, the terrain gets harder, the evidence degrades further, and the window for answers narrows. When this case breaks, and cases built on this much forensic evidence do break, you'll want to be here for it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Every development in this investigation, covered the moment it happens. Don't find out about the breakthrough 3 weeks after everyone else already knows. More than 60 days later, there's evidence. There's a suspect on camera. There's DNA. But there's still no name, and Nancy is still missing.